Hi, I'm Ari, co-founder and CTO of Magellan Data. Magellan Data is a data aggregator. We crawl 300 million websites a month to see where they go, and we use that data and other sources to map corporate relationships so that our customers, primarily sales teams, know that when they're selling to someone, they know if it's part of a larger corporate group, and perhaps they can expand their pipeline and find other related entities that they might have a warm introduction to and improve their pipeline process as a result.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Uh, so, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but obviously, maybe tell us your background and tell us there's like, hey, I was just doing this and then I saw this gap in the market and we decided that we could do it either better than somebody else or it's the first time somebody's doing something like this. Maybe share that.
So my co-founder and I met about 10 years ago. He was originally my boss at my first job out of college. And we worked together at a couple different startups, mostly on product teams for startups where the product was data. And so a lot of the times that data was entity data, data on companies. And we realized that in these cases, the data is dynamic. You can't just collect it once you have it and it's done. It's changing all the time. Companies change their names, change their websites, they get acquired, they go out of business. And we were always struggling with keeping up with that landscape. And there weren't really any tools out there for resolving that. We weren't really ever sure that there was a business idea for it because we weren't sure who would use it if the TAM was large enough. And a few years ago, I joined AWS on their startup sales organization, primarily for data integrations and managing their Salesforce CRM data quality. And I started to use a lot of the same strategies that my co founder and I had used at some prior startups to manage duplicate data, outdated information, integrating data from third party data vendors. And I realized that if this is a problem that Amazon's facing, and this was a problem a lot of these startups were facing, it's got to be a problem everyone's facing. And so when we first started Magellan Data, at the time we called it Sorek, um, we thought that the real goal was to build a mechanism that someone can use to clean their CRM of duplicate entity data, make sure that the quality was top notch. And by virtue of building that solution, we also had to build a corporate relationship hierarchy so that we weren't calling a subsidiary and parents duplicates of each other just because the subsidiary was rolled up. And when we started our enterprise go to market strategy, actually selling that solution, we started to realize that a lot of folks were a lot more interested in the corporate relationship data rather than the actual deduplication. It's a simpler problem to solve. People were more willing to buy it because it wasn't as invasive. We didn't need so many permissions to get into their CRM. And so we pivoted and really just leaned into that and decided, from my experience at Amazon, buying a lot of corporate data from different data vendors, that they have duplicates and outdated data and incomplete information, and it's non authoritative. You can't really trust it. That we've already worked in this space, we've seen what that data looks like, and we could build a data set in the land and the age of AI and build it more at scale for cheaper and better than some of the current players are. And that's kind of how we got to our current point today.
I remember when you and I were talking originally, you said something and we both lived at you at AWS. I mentioned I was with some large IBM and Accenture and things like that. And the fact that somebody's calling on an account, but it's locked the ability for somebody else to see it. So you guys are helping bridge that gap as well, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of our first customers, before we had a platform to sell it through, we were kind of doing more of a tech enabled services where we had an actual Salesforce account. We would go in, we would use the Salesforce API and really manually make a lot of these changes. They'd already had Google as a customer of theirs using their API. And the AE who owned Google had a really good relationship with his counterpart at Google that was responsible for the integration for using the product. And he wasn't aware, because they had some row level security on their CRM. He wasn't aware that there was even an account for Google Ads, let alone that there was an open opportunity on it that had been open for several months and had gotten cold. And when we went in and actually created these linkages and linked Google Ads to the Google account, because of that link, he was able to see that account now and see that opportunity. And he reopened it. And within 3 or 4 months, they were able to close an $800,000 API deal with Google Ads as a result of it.
Yeah, no, that's, and again, having lived that world, I'm very familiar. So you mentioned total addressable market and things like that. So what does your ideal customer look like? And then maybe what are you guys doing today to get the word out and acquire customers?
Totally. So, as typical early stage startup, a lot of it is still just figuring it out. We recently launched our Spotlight app. It's non subscription, it's pay as you go. For the most part, unless you're in sales ops or rev ops, you're not going to go past the free credits that you would receive. And the idea is it's a simple upload your CSV, get data back within a few minutes of all the relationships to other entities that exist within your CSV. And that was primarily geared towards account executives, with the idea being, let's get in front of them, let's find champions, have them introduce us to rev ops and sales ops to integrate us fully into their CRM, or into whatever back end processes they have for surfacing this type of data. But in reality, the ideal customer profile, the people that we could talk to directly, would be folks in data centric RevOps roles. Typically, at larger companies like 500 plus employees, they'll have not just a RevOps person, but a RevOps function where they're responsible for ingesting data from third party sources to bring into their CRM. Those are the types of people that we want to talk to, that probably want to talk to us, so that they can automatically create new accounts with warm leads and add the corporate relationships and hierarchy between accounts that already exist in their system, and so on and so forth.
Okay, now that makes a lot of sense. Um, and then looking at obviously where you guys are at, and it sounds like a silly question. I'm assuming, massive growth objectives, and I mean, it sounds like you said you're still figuring those things out. Is that how are you guys working together? Is it still just the two of you, you and the founder and your partner, and trying to figure those things out?
Yeah, exactly. My co-founder and I started the business in August of 22. For the first 2 to 3 years, it was largely a part-time thing for us. He doesn't have another full-time job outside of this, but he was a new father. He was a new father again. I was working full-time, and so we only really just started focusing on this as a full-time opportunity for ourselves around this time last year. So even though we were founded almost 4 years ago, it feels like we're in the very, very early stages of being a startup. And so we've really been taking a lot of feedback from folks that we've talked to, prospects that we've had, even clients that we have, and trying to figure out what is the right way to package the data. We know that this is data that people want, but the idea of how we package it, is it through an app, a data stream, an API, a direct integration? That's been more of the challenging part for us. So we recently launched an API that people can use. We're talking with a few places about integrating into their own platforms, that they're kind of a platform marketplace. And right now, the focus is really selling customized data stream and API solutions as enterprise contracts to larger corporations who need very, very specific data to help them with their sales motion. It could be customized industry taxonomy based on their own industry classifications. It could be finding location information, in addition to the stuff that we do out of the box, which is corporate relationships, PE data, active versus inactive companies, and so on.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So thinking about this now, um, focusing on it full time versus having a job and stuff like that. I mean, other than the obvious, you have more time to focus on it. What's the big change in your day been? What have you been able to do more of? And what's it opened up for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I was still putting in like a good 40 plus hours a week on the startup beforehand. I didn't really have much weekends to myself or evenings to myself, a lot of late nights, and certainly it's still a lot of that now. It's just more time that I'm spending. But uh, really, the biggest change that I've noticed, my co-founder has noticed as well, is I kind of think of computers as like, excuse me, brains as like computers, right? We have a certain amount of RAM, we have a certain amount of CPU, a certain amount of disk memory. And when you have too many applications open, even if you're only working on one program, your RAM starts to overload, your computer starts to run a lot slower. And it kind of felt like that for me, that when I was working two jobs, it was really hard for me to kind of find that line where it's like I'm compartmentalizing and only thinking about this thing right now. And so I felt very overloaded and overwhelmed with all of the projects I had to keep track of and the things I had to think about and the problems I needed to solve. And it was really difficult for me to put 100% of my mental acuity towards one specific thing because I was so overwhelmed with everything else that was going on. And that's not to say I wasn't productive by any means, but there was definitely a giant shift in my ability to produce work product for Magellan Data after I started committing to it full time.
Yeah, no, I think that's natural and obvious. So kind of taking it to, maybe it's somewhat of a similar question, but um, and I think what I've seen too, for I had a similar situation before I started this. I was starting to do this. Then you can change your LinkedIn and you can make yourself truly available and not feel like you're cheating one and the other, right? So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
but taking that to the next level is, if somebody was sitting there saying, I think I'm going to start a business now and I want to see if I keep this on the side. You did answer it about time and stuff like that, but what would your advice be to them?
Honestly, my advice would be don't do it.
You're like the fourth person who said that to me in the last little
Yeah,
while.
it's a really, really, really big commitment. Financially, I mean, you can control that, especially when you're kind of building before acquiring customers. You should really try to limit it. The rule that I had was I started with $1,000, and that was just to kind of see if like there's something here. Could I crawl this many websites without doing it on AWS because that would have been obscenely expensive? Um, could I do it with co-located servers? So spending $1,000, buying a used server, playing around with that, and once I had like the pieces that I knew like this could work, then it was all right, let's throw a few $1,000s at it, spend some time trying to figure out what data I could actually collect, and is there a way to monetize this? It's once you get to that stage, it becomes a big part of your life. You think about it all the time. Your waking moments that you're not spending working for your full time job are spent doing it on that. You know, you might not be able to go out with friends or go out with your spouse, or you might not be mentally present when you do. And it puts a strain on a lot of those relationships. And it's really, really difficult. And certainly not everyone has the ability to just quit their full time job and go for it. It takes a lot of preparation. I guess the biggest piece of advice that I would give to anyone who's really thinking about it is start planning to quit. Start planning to quit because if you're going to take this business seriously, there's going to come a point in time where it's no longer going to be a side hustle. And it might not be at the point where it can sustain itself and you financially. And you might need to be able to devote all of your attention to it to get it past that point. That's where we've been for the last couple of months since we've started to do this full time. And you need to be prepared financially from a personal point of view to make that sacrifice and make that commitment. So if you're earning a great salary, start living well below your means, start putting money aside, start cutting down on expenses, and figure out what other expenses you can cut down on, because the life of an early stage startup founder is often romanticized, but it's difficult. It's really, really difficult.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And so on that note as well, like now that you are spending your time in it, and you said you're super busy, but what is, if there is such a thing, what does a typical day look like for you? What are the things you're working on? What are the
A typical day is um, the first thing that my co-founder and I usually do is we do a sync, either once a day, every other day, once a week. It just depends on the projects we're working on. And, usually in that sync, we'll discuss what we're working on that day. We keep a running list of all the things that need to get done. And there's always another fire to put out, and things get pushed back onto the back burner. And it's just managing that. I mean, certainly something that I need to be better about is managing expectations. How long is it going to take me to finish a particular project? Because, it's only two of us. So the amount of work that each of us is producing is going to have a massive impact on the potential growth of the business. It's not like a 100-person company that you're only 1% of the workforce. We're 50% each. And so a typical day to day is us syncing, figuring out what we need to accomplish that day, that week, talking about the projects. There's a lot of talking and figuring things out. In some cases, a lot of documentation, writing it out, especially if it's a project we're not going to get to for a little while. And then it's just sitting down and doing it. It's a lot of just sitting down and coding and testing and doing everything from A to Z that normally an entire team would do and trying to do it faster. Sometimes there's a lot of flexibility. I might take off an afternoon and then come back and work later in the evening, if my schedule allows it and if it's something that I want to do. Uh, there's no real balance necessarily for like a work life balance. Your life is your work. And you can find time to do other things, certainly go to the gym, hang out with friends, go out to dinner, but your free time is going to be spent doing this. You're not going to be binge watching a TV show or playing a video game or things like that. You're going to be working.
Yeah, no, that's I can relate. And so you touched on it a little bit earlier related to the product. So maybe two questions around the topic of the minute with AI. So what have you done from inside your product, and then maybe just to take your day, is there something that you're doing to help leverage AI to make that day a little bit easier?
Absolutely. I mean, we use AI productivity apps. We have Copilot, we have Claude, we have Gemini, we have ChatGPT OpenAI credits as part of their startup program. So, I mean, even just like not from a product integration standpoint, just from a day to day standpoint, we're using AI all the time, whether it's to refactor or to test or to review code or write new code or to think through a project and structuring an outline for it. How even strategy regarding sales calls. What sort of questions should we be prepared to answer? What questions should we ask? It's been really, really helpful from that perspective. It almost feels like a third co founder in that way. But in terms of our product itself, so when we started building, AI was still very, very early on from like in the case of what it is now. I think maybe GPT 2.0 had just come out. It wasn't really successful. Um, and when GPT 3 came out, we started testing with it and we realized that it could help us with a lot of the different challenges that we were facing from a big data point of view. I mean, we ping 300 million sites a month over the course of a year. That's over 3.5 billion records that we're processing. And one of the big challenges that we had early on in our development was the redirect reason. Why does a website redirect? It could be going to a parked domain or a domain reseller. It could be because it was acquired and integrated. It could be a name change. It could be a typo. Like if you go to airbnb.com, it'll take you to Airbnb. And it was a really, really difficult thing to do at scale at that time. And we've since revisited it in the last 6 months or so. And the state of AI now is just making it such a simple process at scale, especially as prices start to come down for some older models that are still perfectly sufficient for what we're doing. And it's really, really helped with that process. It's helped us with mapping corporate relationships. Of course, we don't just take AI at its word, but what we'll do is we will pipe in context from news articles and we'll ask it to essentially fill in the blanks for us. Is this an M&A transaction? Who's the buyer? Who's the seller? Who's the target? When did this happen? What type of transactions? Is it LBO? Is it a take private? Is it a straight up acquisition? Is it a joint venture? What's going on here? That contextualizing that AI can do for us that then we can feed into more generic and conventional data parsers for the purpose of preparing our data sets has made it a lot cheaper, productive, scalable. I mean, any word you could use to describe a great process. Um, and it's really a far cry from where we used to be. I remember at the very beginning we were leveraging a machine learning capable server. We had a because we co-locate a lot to save costs on AWS. We had bought a server that had some GPU components for the purposes of using things like TensorFlow and PyTorch and all the other fun old school ML packages. And one of the things that we were working on was a NERS engine, named entity recognition engine, which is it can identify like proper nouns in text. If we gave it a list of like a caption of text from a website, it might be able to say, this looks like a proper noun. It might be the company name, but it'll also grab cardinal directions, countries, maybe partner affiliates, people's names, things like that. It was really, really noisy, took forever to run, would miss things very often, and it eventually became a project that we had completely abandoned. Um, and we'd spent probably over hundreds of hours on it. And if I needed to pull that type of context out from our web data that we've pulled down, I can spend 5 minutes now having Claude put together a script for me, plug in our open AI key, and let it run, and it'll finish everything in a matter of probably days. And I'll have spent only a little bit of time setting it up, and we don't have to have a dedicated server for machine learning. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry for the long-winded
No,
answer.
no, but that's, I mean, I think that that's it's super relevant. So, kind of thinking through that now as you grow your business and take it to the next level, like what do you think your first hire, outsource, whatever it is of a function would be? Have you, I mean, I'm assuming you guys have thought about that.
We did have a hire at one point. We hired a VP of sales. It didn't work out in a very short amount of time. We parted ways. Um, Before we hired her, a lot of people, former founders, investors that we had talked to, had stated how important it is for founder led sales. And only after we moved on from her did we really understand how right they were, that we're so early stage, we're really flexible, customizable. There isn't anything written down about exactly what we do. And it's a lot of discovery on these calls and trying to understand people's pain points and figuring out if there's a way we can solve that. That's exactly how we ended up pivoting from deduplication as our primary value prop to corporate relationship mapping as our primary value. And so I don't think that we'd hire a salesperson anytime soon. Maybe a BDR to help with some pipeline generation. But until there comes a point in time where we just can't handle pipeline, I don't think we would ever hire another senior salesperson because they just wouldn't be able to do as good of a job as us. And every deal matters at this stage. I think in reality, we have a contractor right now who does a lot of our front end and back end web development for our web applications. I handle most of our data infrastructure and data engineering needs. We probably hire someone like him to really just make sure that anytime we wanted to make changes or improvements or roll something out, we don't have to work on his schedule if another customer or client of his is taking up some of his time. That would probably be a really, really big one. Um, I can't really think of anything else where we would have needs for that. Even from a marketing standpoint, marketing we felt has been a lot of trial and error. We have some former colleagues that are very experienced that meet with us regularly and give us advice and look through our campaigns and tell us what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right. So it really is our our web developer and maybe a BDR.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think those are based on where you're at. That makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate this has been good. I mean, as we run to the end of the time, maybe to tell us like if maybe give us the statement. Hey, if you're a company that looks like this, reach out to us. Where can we find you? Tell us about your LinkedIn and all of that, so that we can make sure that people can find you guys.
Absolutely. So if you are a company in the B2B space that sells primarily to startups or large enterprises that might be part of a larger corporate family or are PE backed, we'd love to talk to you.
Magellan, and you go to, and the website's Magellan Data.
MagellanData.io. Yes.
There you go. So everybody, hopefully this was helpful to everybody. Good advice, different perspectives on the true non-sexiness of startups, but stick with it. And if you're going to go for it, go for it. So Ari, I really appreciate your time today. We we joked earlier on, but as we got on, like maybe the only two people working today because it's President's Day, but it doesn't make any difference. So thank you for
Yeah.
doing that. I appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Take care.